by Barry Eads. My time grows very short. All the manuscript I have written is safely smuggled out of the prison. There is a man I can trust who will see that it is published. No longer am I in Murderers' Row. I am writing these lines in the death cell, and the death watch is set on me. Night and day is this death watch on me, and its paradoxical function is to see that I do not die. I must be kept alive for the hanging, or else will the public be cheated, the law blackened, and a mark of demerit placed against the time-serving warden who runs this prison, and one of whose duties is to see that his condemned ones are duly and properly hanged. Often I marvel at the strange way some men make their livings. This shall be my last writing. Tomorrow morning the hour is set. The governor has declined to pardon or reprieve, despite the fact that the Anti-Capital Punishment League has raised quite a stir in California. The reporters are gathered like so many buzzards. I have seen them all. They are queer young fellows, most of them, and most queer is it that they will thus earn bread and butter, cocktails and tobacco, room rent, and if they are married, shoes and school books for their children, by witnessing the execution of Professor Darrell Standing, and by describing for the public how Professor Darrell Standing died at the end of a rope. Ah, well, they will be sicker than I at the end of the affair. As I sit here and muse on it all, the footfalls of the death watch going up and down outside my cage, the man's suspicious eyes ever peering in on me, almost I weary of eternal recurrence. I have lived so many lives. I weary of the endless struggle and pain and catastrophe that come to those who sit in the high places, tread the shining ways, and wander among the stars. Almost I hope, when next I re-inhabit form, that it shall be that of a peaceful farmer. There is my dream farm. I should like to engage just for one whole life in that. Oh, my dream farm, my alfalfa meadows, my efficient Jersey cattle, my upland pastures, my brush-covered slopes melting into tilled fields, while ever higher up the slopes my Angora goats eat away brush to tillage. There is a basin there, a natural basin high up in the slopes, with a generous watershed on 3 sides. I should like to throw a dam across the 4th side, which is surprisingly narrow. At a paltry price of labor I could impound 20 million gallons of water. For see, one great drawback to farming in California is our long dry summer. This prevents the growing of cover crops, and the sensitive soil, naked, a mere surface dust mulch, has its humus burned out of it by the sun. Now with that dam I could grow 3 crops a year, observing due rotation, and be able to turn under a wealth of green manure. I have just endured a visit from the warden. I say endured advisedly. He is quite different from the warden of San Quentin. He is very nervous, and perforce I had to entertain him. This is his first hanging. He told me so. And I, with a clumsy attempt at wit, did not reassure him when I explained that it was also my first hanging. He was unable to laugh. He has a girl in high school, and his boy is a freshman at Stanford. He has no income outside his salary, his wife is an invalid, and he is worried in that he has been rejected by the life insurance doctors as an undesirable risk. Really, the man told me almost all his troubles. Had I not diplomatically terminated the interview, he would still be here telling me the remainder of them. My last 2 years in San Quentin were very gloomy and depressing. Ed Morrell, by one of the wildest freaks of chance, was taken out of solitary and made head trustee of the whole prison. This was Al Hutchins's old job, and it carried a graft of $3,000 a year. To my misfortune, Jake Oppenheimer, who had rotted in solitary for so many years, turned sour on the world, on everything. For 8 months he refused to talk even to me. In prison, news will travel. Give it time, and it will reach dungeon and solitary cell. It reached me, at last, that Cecil Winwood, the poet-forger, the snitcher, the coward, and the stool, was returned for a fresh forgery. It will be remembered that it was this Cecil Winwood who concocted the fairy story that I had changed the plant of the non-existent dynamite, and who was responsible for the 5 years I had then spent in solitary. I decided to kill Cecil Winwood. You see, Morrell was gone, and Oppenheimer, until the outbreak that finished him, had remained in the silence. Solitary had grown monotonous for me. I had to do something. So I remembered back to the time when I was Adam Strang and patiently nursed revenge for 40 years. What he had done, I could do if once I locked my hands on Cecil Winwood's throat. It cannot be expected of me to divulge how I came into possession of the 4 needles. They were small cambric needles. Emaciated as my body was, I had to saw 4 bars, each in 2 places, in order to make an aperture through which I could squirm. I did it. I used up 1 needle to each bar. This meant 2 cuts to a bar, and it took a month to a cut. Thus, I should have been 8 months in cutting my way out. Unfortunately, I broke my last needle on the last bar, and I had to wait 3 months before I could get another needle. But I got it, and I got out. I regret greatly that I did not get Cecil Winwood. I had calculated well on everything save one thing. The certain chance to find Winwood would be in the dining-room at dinner hour. So I waited until Pie-Faced Jones, the sleepy guard, should be on shift at the noon hour. At that time I was the only inmate of solitary, so that Pie-Faced Jones was quickly snoring. I removed my bars, squeezed out, stole past him along the ward, opened the door, and was free, to a portion of the inside of the prison. And here was the one thing I had not calculated on: myself. I had been 5 years in solitary. I was hideously weak. I weighed 87 pounds. I was half blind, and I was immediately stricken with agoraphobia. I was affrighted of spaciousness. 5 years in narrow walls had unfitted me for the enormous declivity of the stairway, for the vastitude of the prison yard. The descent of that stairway I consider the most heroic exploit I ever accomplished. The yard was deserted. The blinding sun blazed down on it. Thrice I essayed to cross it, but my senses reeled, and I shrank back to the wall for protection. Again, summoning all my courage, I attempted it. But my poor blear eyes, like a bat's, startled me at my shadow on the flagstones. I attempted to avoid my own shadow, tripped, fell over it, and like a drowning man struggling for shore, crawled back on hands and knees to the wall. I leaned against the wall and cried. It was the first time in many years that I had cried. I remember noting, even in my extremity, the warmth of the tears on my cheeks and the salt taste when they reached my lips. Then I had a chill, and for a time shook as with an ague. Abandoning the openness of the yard as too impossible a feat for one in my condition, still shaking with the chill, crouching close to the protecting wall, my hands touching it, I started to skirt the yard. Then it was, somewhere along, that the guard Thurston espied me. I saw him, distorted by my bleared eyes, a huge, well-fed monster, rushing upon me with incredible speed out of the remote distance. Possibly at that moment he was 20 feet away. He weighed 170 pounds. The struggle between us can be easily imagined. But somewhere in that brief struggle it was claimed that I struck him on the nose with my fist to such purpose as to make that organ bleed. At any rate, being a lifer, and the penalty in California for battery by a lifer being death, I was so found guilty by a jury which could not ignore the asseverations of the guard Thurston and the rest of the prison hangdogs that testified, and I was so sentenced by a judge who could not ignore the law as spread plainly on the statute book. I was well pummeled by Thurston, and all the way back up that prodigious stairway I was roundly kicked, punched, and cuffed by the horde of trustees and guards who got in one another's way in their zeal to assist him. Heavens, if his nose did bleed, the probability is that some of his own kind were guilty of causing it in the confusion of the scuffle. I shouldn't care if I were responsible for it myself, save that it is so pitiful a thing for which to hang a man. I have just had a talk with the man on shift of my death watch. A little less than a year ago, Jake Oppenheimer occupied this same death cell on the road to the gallows which I will tread tomorrow. This man was one of the death watch on Jake. He is an old soldier. He chews tobacco constantly and untidily, for his gray beard and mustache are stained yellow. He is a widower, with 14 living children, all married, and is the grandfather of 31 living grandchildren, and the great-grandfather of 4 younglings, all girls. It was like pulling teeth to extract such information. He is a queer old codger, of a low order of intelligence. That is why, I fancy, he has lived so long and fathered so numerous a progeny. His mind must have crystallized 30 years ago. His ideas are none of them later than that vintage. He rarely says more than yes and no to me. It is not because he is surly. He has no ideas to utter. I don't know, when I live again, but what one incarnation such as his would be a nice vegetative existence in which to rest up ere I go star-roving again. But to go back. I must take a line in which to tell, after I was hustled and bustled, kicked and punched up that terrible stairway by Thurston and the rest of the prison dogs, of the infinite relief of my narrow cell when I found myself back in solitary. It was so safe, so secure. I felt like a lost child returned home again. I loved those very walls that I had so hated for 5 years. All that kept the vastness of space, like a monster, from pouncing upon me were those good stout walls of mine, close to hand on every side. Agoraphobia is a terrible affliction. I have had little opportunity to experience it, but from that little I can only conclude that hanging is a far easier matter. I have just had a hearty laugh. The prison doctor, a likable chap, has just been in to have a yarn with me, incidentally to proffer me his good offices in the matter of dope. Of course I declined his proposition to shoot me so full of morphine through the night that tomorrow I would not know, when I marched to the gallows, whether I was coming or going. But the laugh, it was just like Jake Oppenheimer. I can see the lean keenness of the man as he strung the reporters with his deliberate bull which they thought involuntary. It seems, his last morning, breakfast finished, encased in the shirt without a collar, that the reporters, assembled for his last word in his cell, asked him for his views on capital punishment. Who says we have more than the slightest veneer of civilization coated over our raw savagery when a group of living men can ask such a question of a man about to die and whom they are to see die? But Jake was ever game. "Gentlemen," he said, "I hope to live to see the day when capital punishment is abolished." I have lived many lives through the long ages. Man, the individual, has made no moral progress in the past 10,000 years. I affirm this absolutely. The difference between an unbroken colt and the patient draught horse is purely a difference of training. Training is the only moral difference between the man of today and the man of 10,000 years ago. Under his thin skin of morality, which he has had polished onto him, he is the same savage that he was 10,000 years ago. Morality is a social fund, an accretion through the painful ages. The new-born child will become a savage unless it is trained, polished, by the abstract morality that has been so long accumulating. Thou shalt not kill. Piffle! They are going to kill me tomorrow morning. Thou shalt not kill. Piffle! In the shipyards of all civilized countries they are laying today the keels of dreadnoughts and of super-dreadnoughts. Dear friends, I, who am about to die, salute you with piffle. I ask you, what finer morality is preached today than was preached by Christ, by Buddha, by Socrates and Plato, by Confucius, and whoever was the author of the Mahabharata? Good Lord, 50,000 years ago, in our totem families, our women were cleaner, our family and group relations more rigidly right. I must say that the morality we practiced in those old days was a finer morality than is practiced today. Don't dismiss this thought hastily. Think of our child labor, of our police graft, and our political corruption, of our food adulteration, and of our slavery of the daughters of the poor. When I was a son of the mountain and a son of the bull, prostitution had no meaning. We were clean, I tell you. We did not dream such depths of depravity. Yea, so are all the lesser animals of today clean. It required man, with his imagination, aided by his mastery of matter, to invent the deadly sins. The lesser animals, the other animals, are incapable of sin. I read hastily back through the many lives of many times and many places. I have never known cruelty more terrible, nor so terrible, as the cruelty of our prison system of today. I have told you what I have endured in a jacket and in solitary in the first decade of this 20th century after Christ. In the old days we punished drastically and killed quickly. We did it because we so desired, because of whim, if you so please. But we were not hypocrites. We did not call upon press and pulpit and university to sanction us in our willfulness of savagery. What we wanted to do we went and did, on our legs upstanding, and we faced all reproof and censure on our legs upstanding, and did not hide behind the skirts of classical economists and bourgeois philosophers, nor behind the skirts of subsidized preachers, professors, and editors. Why, goodness me, 100 years ago, 50 years ago, 5 years ago, in these United States, assault and battery was not a civil capital crime. But this year, the year of our Lord, 1913, in the state of California, they hanged Jake Oppenheimer for such an offense. And tomorrow, for the civil capital crime of punching a man on the nose, they are going to take me out and hang me. Query: doesn't it require a long time for the ape and the tiger to die when such statutes are spread on the statute book of California in the 1913th year after Christ? Lord, Lord, they only crucified Christ. They have done far worse to Jake Oppenheimer and me. As Ed Morrell once rapped to me with his knuckles, the worst possible use you can put a man to is to hang him. No, I have little respect for capital punishment. Not only is it a dirty game, degrading to the hangdogs who personally perpetrate it for a wage, but it is degrading to the commonwealth that tolerates it, votes for it, and pays the taxes for its maintenance. Capital punishment is so silly, so stupid, so horribly unscientific. To be hanged by the neck until dead is society's quaint phraseology. Morning is come, my last morning. I slept like a babe throughout the night. I slept so peacefully that once the death watch got a fright. He thought I had suffocated myself in my blankets. The poor man's alarm was pitiful. His bread and butter was at stake. Had it truly been so, it would have meant a black mark against him, perhaps discharge, and the outlook for an unemployed man is bitter just at present. They tell me that Europe began liquidating 2 years ago, and that now the United States has begun. That means either a business crisis or a quiet panic, and that the armies of the unemployed will be large next winter, the breadlines long. I have had my breakfast. It seemed a silly thing to do, but I ate it heartily. The warden came with a quart of whiskey. I presented it to Murderers' Row with my compliments. The warden, poor man, is afraid, if I be not drunk, that I shall make a mess of the function and cast reflection on his management. They have put on me the shirt without a collar. It seems I am a very important man this day. Quite a lot of people are suddenly interested in me. The doctor has just gone. He has taken my pulse. I asked him to. It is normal. I write these random thoughts, and, a sheet at a time, they start on their secret way out beyond the walls. I am the calmest man in the prison. I am like a child about to start on a journey. I am eager to be gone, curious for the new places I shall see. This fear of the lesser death is ridiculous to one who has gone into the dark so often and lived again. The warden with a quart of champagne. I have dispatched it down Murderers' Row. Queer, isn't it, that I am so considered this last day? It must be that these men who are to kill me are themselves afraid of death. To quote Jake Oppenheimer, I, who am about to die, must seem to them something god-awful. Ed Morrell has just sent word in to me. They tell me he has paced up and down all night outside the prison wall. Being an ex-convict, they have red-taped him out of seeing me to say goodbye. Savages? I don't know. Possibly just children. I'll wager most of them will be afraid to be alone in the dark tonight after stretching my neck. But Ed Morrell's message. My hand is in yours, old pal. I know you'll swing off game. The reporters have just left. I'll see them next and last time from the scaffold ere the hangman hides my face in the black cap. They will be looking curiously sick. Queer young fellows. Some show that they have been drinking. 2 or 3 look sick with foreknowledge of what they have to witness. It seems easier to be hanged than to look on. My last lines. It seems I am delaying the procession. My cell is quite crowded with officials and dignitaries. They are all nervous. They want it over. Without a doubt, some of them have dinner engagements. I am really offending them by writing these few words. The priest has again preferred his request to be with me to the end. The poor man. Why should I deny him that solace? I have consented, and he now appears quite cheerful. Such small things make some men happy. I could stop and laugh for a hearty 5 minutes, if they were not in such a hurry. Here I close. I can only repeat myself. There is no death. Life is spirit, and spirit cannot die. Only the flesh dies and passes, ever acrawl with the chemic ferment that informs it, ever plastic, ever crystallizing, only to melt into the flux and to crystallize into fresh and diverse forms that are ephemeral and that melt back into the flux. Spirit alone endures and continues to build upon itself through successive and endless incarnations as it works upward toward the light. What shall I be when I live again? I wonder. I wonder. End of chapter 22. End of The Jacket by Jack London.